civilians. The deputy commander of the Federation of the Awakened told the Minister of Defense that his people were trying to bring Steve to their side. The minister replied that Cyrus had already arrived and suggested that they should observe for now and see if he was up to their level. And at this time Cyrus arrived at the place where Steve had landed and walked towards him to the sounds of enthusiastic screams. Steve continued to yell for Hero to come out when Cyrus called out to him. Our hero turned towards the voice and looked with interest at the approaching man. Cyrus said he was arrested for trespassing, inciting fear and other public order offenses, but Steve seemed to ignore his whole speech and asked if he was Hero. The man said his name was Cyrus from the police department. He asked Steve to get off the wyvern and surrender. Our hero looked at the man and said that if he was not an IRO, then he had better get out of here. The crowd was shocked by this answer because he refused to cooperate with Cyrus. Suddenly, the wyvern and Steve found themselves entangled in some black threads that came from the red circles on Cyrus's hands. The crowd rejoiced and shouted that this was it, the famous Cyrus tie-up. Steve looked at his body, bound with black threads, and chuckled in surprise. Cyrus shouted at him not to move, otherwise the vine would tighten even further. And our hero was still looking at the black threads in surprise, spreading his arms to the sides. Cyrus jumped up, preparing to strike Steve, and shouted that now he would be taken by force. Commentators wrote that Cyrus needed 1 minute to deal with Steve and said goodbye to him. However, the one who got punched in the face was not Steve, but Cyrus. Steve hit him with such force that the man flew into the sky, and the vine that had enveloped Steve fell into pieces. The crowd gasped in shock as they watched their hero Cyrus fly upward. He landed not far from Steve, falling on his back. But it was a cunning move. He immediately got to his feet and activated the trap skill. But he still couldn't understand what had just happened, and his nose began to bleed. Steve smiled and said that that's right. Since your territory is under attack, you must defend it with your life. After these words, the wyvern flapped its wings and broke its bonds, emitting a loud roar. Hearing the growl and seeing how easily they dealt with his bonds, Cyrus said he was scared. He said that everything was as expected from a dragon knight. He is also strong as the rumors said. If he hadn't created a debuff the moment he was hit, his face would have been crushed. Steve said that this is how it is, and since he knows it, then it's better for him to leave. But Cyrus went on the attack again and said he would face another charge of assaulting a police officer. Our hero looked contemptuously at the policeman and said that he was an annoying guy. The policeman jumped up and screaming "Die" was about to stab Steve. And at the same moment, our hero activated the air whirlwind skill, raising his hand up. Streams of air appeared from his hand and caught the surprised Cyrus. The crowd gasped again, but this time not in surprise, but rather in fear. The Minister of Defense and the Deputy Commander of the Federation of Awakened watched in shock. And at this time, the air currents lifted Cyrus, spinning him in a whirlwind more and more. He flew out of the whirlwind and flew forcefully into the corner of the building, breaking it into small fragments. And then he was thrown in the other direction and crashed into the windows of the building opposite. The men watching from the headquarters looked at what was happening in horror. Chad was shocked that Steve sent him flying, and Donnie said that this was expected of their brother. Steve shouted for Hero to go out himself and not send his minions, and at that time the wyvern released a column of fire from its mouth. The military men who had cordoned off the building began to shout at Steve not to do this, because they were simply protecting civilians. Commentators were shocked that Cyrus was being treated like a doll and were surprised at Steve's performance. The Secretary of Defense said he was even more amazing than he thought, and added that Steve seemed like a better asset than Hero. The Deputy Commander of the Federation of the Awakened said that Steve sent them an invitation, and they would accept it when air travel was opened. And Steve shouted that if they didn't bring Hero, he would burn everything within a kilometer radius. The crowd, hearing this threat, became frightened and people began to run away screaming. One of the soldiers sitting in the headquarters said that the townspeople are in danger, and they need to get rid of the Dragon Knight with the help of a satellite. The minister said with a smile that this was getting interesting and asked why everyone was so nervous. He asked the deputy commander of the Federation what was next, and he replied that Lieutenant Messi was getting ready. Suddenly someone behind Steve shouted at him to stop, and he turned back. A large man in uniform stood in front of our hero and looked at him boldly. Steve saw his information window, in which it was written that this was an ordinary person. Steve asked the man in surprise who he was, and the wyvern threateningly released a stream of fire. The man did not look scared and said he was Lope Massey from the police department, adding that it would be nice if he stopped. Steve responded by telling them to bring Hero here and that he would give them 30 minutes. Messi replied that Hero would not be able to come here now, and our hero asked why. The lieutenant said menacingly that he was now in the 7th level dungeon. Steve said out loud that he had gone hunting and asked the man where exactly he had gone. Messi said that he could not see him now because Hero would take 10 days to return. Steve was shocked that he was provoked by someone who needed 10 days to clear the dungeon. The lieutenant was confused by these words and said that this was still a level 7 dungeon. Steve said he would be back in 10 days when Hero returned. Messi asked him to do so and added that Steve must pay for everything he did today. Our hero replied that it was their mistake and added that stealing young animals or eggs while the leader is hunting is the lot of petty thieves. The lieutenant smiled ominously and promised that he would convey these words. The wyvern flapped its wings and they flew up, while the frightened townspeople followed them with their gazes. They said at headquarters that they couldn't let Steve escape like that. It would lead to worldwide humiliation. But the minister replied that it would be even worse to use the forces of the army against one awakened one. The man recalled that Steve promised to return and asked the air fleet to accompany him. Our hero flew home, not paying attention to several helicopters nearby. Suddenly Steve turned around in surprise, seeing a huge black portal on the ground. Flying past, he thought that this was probably the gate to the planet Kuchan, and while Steve was returning home, the news was already full of headlines that he had declared war on Hero. Seeing this news, the guys from Steve's guild shouted joyfully, raising the bottle. They said that this was expected of Steve. He made them pay everything back in full. It was also reported that Cyrus was taken to the emergency room with a concussion after being hit once. The government regarded this incident as an attack and demanded that Steve either be extradited or they declare war. The ministers gathered at the emergency meeting have still not made any statements. The commentators were again divided. Some asked to extradite Steve. Some asked what bad Steve had done, because Hero even killed the wolves, and others were afraid of war. Donnie said that it looks like there really will be a war because of Steve, and Chad excitedly asked what they should do. The boy offered to move to the USA. They can't start a war with them. Jim suggested we talk seriously about this when Steve returned to the guild. Suddenly they saw a dove fly through the window, emitting a loud squeak. Then everything outside the window began to shine with a blue light, filling the room with it. They heard Bill's voice shouting that his uncle was back. The guys tensed up from this news. Steve angrily asked where the answer and the uncle bastards had gone, to which the kid replied that they were drinking in the office. A couple of seconds later, Steve opened the door and his look did not bode well. The guys got nervous. Chad was the first to speak, saying that his brother had finally returned. Steve's eyes began to glow blue as he angrily asked what they were doing. Someone shouted, "Run!" and all the guys rushed to the window, trying to hide from Steve's anger. "Come on, stop!" Steve shouted in rage, watching as the guys rushed in all directions. But there was no stopping the guys, and they jumped out of the window, breaking the glass. And at this time, many people gathered in a large residence somewhere in the mountains. The men in yellow t-shirts were arguing. Some said that they should send him away. Others asked why they should follow the lead. And someone else shouted that then let them send Hero to them. The foreign secretary believed that this had happened because Steve got away with everything. So he imagined himself to be someone unknown. The Minister of National Security believed that Hero started everything and asked why he only blamed Steve for everything. The foreign minister became angry when he heard these words and asked him what he said. The man began to swear, and one of those sitting asked why they didn't go outside to swear there. Suddenly a guy in a black suit said that the president was here. Another man in a yellow t-shirt sat at the head and all the men stopped swearing and fell silent. The president asked if Steve and Hero knew each other. The assistant secretary replied that there was not a single point of contact between them. The president asked then why he tried to do something like that, but they never found a reason. He said that he heard that Hero started everything and asked why someone who betrayed his country would get into a fight with Steve. The head of the bureau said that they have two assumptions about this. First, he was jealous of Steve's recent rapid rise in popularity outside the country. To this assumption, the man said that then he did not know what Hero was doing in first place in the ranking, acting so childishly. The president asked the Secretary of Defense if it came to war, would they be able to win? He replied that if they went back 10 years, they would have a chance if they got a big budget and were able to prepare for 10 years. After these words, the president, without hesitation, told them to give Steve to them. The Minister of Defense became nervous and asked if they could do this. Everyone started saying that this is the best solution. If the war starts now, then everyone will die and that they should think about the well-being of the citizens. The man turned to the head of the bureau and told him to prepare Steve for deportation from the country. But the head of the bureau turned to the president and said that their second assumption was more realistic. The president asked in surprise what second assumption we were talking about. The head of the bureau said that perhaps this was their government's plan to get them to give up Steve. The president said that if this is so, then the threat of war is just a trap. The head of the bureau said that in the current situation, both countries have exhausted their resources and war cannot be avoided. But they definitely need Steve. The president asked if Steve is really that strong, since he has not even returned like Hero. The head of the bureau said that Steve is a little different from the rest. The reason many countries are trying to get Steve is because of the skills he has. The president asked what skills Steve had if everyone was so reckless. The leader said that he was on his way to mastering the power of all the elements that the High Elves possess. The number of those who arrived in Aruki after studying Steve's powers grew, and among them there was no one who possessed regional magic. All the ministers were shocked when they heard about the possibility of using regional magic. The Minister of Agriculture asked, speaking of the magic of the High Elves, he hints at an instant harvest. The head of the bureau said that everything is so, and Steve is a lottery ticket that can bring them a huge amount of money. After these words, the president and ministers agreed that they must protect Steve, even if war breaks out. The president ordered the Minister of Justice to put Steve on the VIP list and prohibit him from leaving the country. And the head thought that where there is money, there will be war. Soon a news article appeared saying that ministers had refused to extradite Steve. Another article stated that the DGB was planning to build a large granary on the grounds of Steve's guild. The black car raced along the highway, and the person sitting in it came to the conclusion that it was all about money. The head asked why Melissa said that, and said that he was the one who saved Steve from being deported. The girl asked if he was talking to Steve, and the head said that there was no point in him refusing help, because he was saving him from prison and giving him the opportunity to earn money. He asked to tell Steve that they will soon raise the guild to the 6th level, so they need to focus on increasing farmland. Then their country will become a breadbasket, instead of a ruka. Melissa said that they had already agreed with Max and would meet with Steve tomorrow. The head of the bureau was surprised that they agreed on a meeting so quickly. He said that the guy smells money, and added that he relies on Melissa. And the girl responded by saying that she always clears everything alone, to which the head was indignant, and said that he would take care of everything later. And at this time, near Area Number 2, Level 3 Locust Dungeon, half-dead Donnie and Chad fell out of the portal, who immediately fell to the ground. Donnie couldn't stand it either and collapsed, and then Jim came out and fell on top of the guys. Soon the monk also fell out of the portal, and Steve looked down at them. He yelled at the guys to get up because they still had 10 rounds to go. But Chad didn't even show any signs of life, and it seems was even snoring quietly. Steve was starting to get even angrier when he got the call. It was Grandma, and our hero immediately asked what happened. Granny asked if he really forced them to practice during lunch, to which Steve replied that these brats had already eaten enough while he was gone. Granny said she was passing the phone to Melissa and asked to talk to her. Melissa said that she heard that they were undergoing high-intensity training in the dungeon for the 3rd day in a row. Steve said it was true and asked what she wanted. The girl asked if he knew that the country's reaction was very serious and added that they have a good solution. Steve listened to her silently, watching the guys lie on the floor, not moving. He thought that people have their own laws, and he forgot that ignoring them could cause pain. After thinking, he said that he suggested we meet at his home and discuss everything. Above Steve's guild house, the tree grew higher and higher, plunging the house into pleasant shade. There were 3 people standing under the tree: Melissa, Steve, and another man. The girl introduced him as the head of the SPFC branch, Max. The man greeted Steve and said that he was very glad to meet them. Having sat down at the table, our hero immediately asked what SPFC needed from him. Max said that not long ago the champion challenged him to a duel and quoted Hero's words that he wouldn't even have to fight to win. Steve was surprised by what he heard and asked if Hero really said the truth. Melissa was surprised by Steve's reaction and asked if he didn't know about it. Our hero said that he seemed to have heard something like that and asked why he did that. Max immediately replied that this was all to make money. He added that if the fight took place, he would receive unrealistic money and suggested not to waste energy on thinking and just agree. Max said that if he agreed, he could both make money and prevent a war. 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. Steve remembered David's words that Hero was a psycho and a killer, and that it was better to avoid him. Our hero asked if he could legally kill Hero if he agreed. Melissa and Max were confused by such a question and could not even answer it right away. The man said that according to the rules, they would not blame Steve if something happened, but they did not encourage murder either. Melissa told Max that she would contact him after she talked to Steve herself. The man agreed and added that he would hope that they would make the right decision. The car drove away, and Melissa waved her hand after it, seeing Max off. She told Steve that if he didn't like it, he didn't have to agree, because the war wouldn't start anyway. To which our hero replied that he really wanted to agree. The girl said that the goals of Hero's country are crystal clear, either to lure him away or to destroy him. But Steve replied that he didn't care about their motives. Hero was just asking for a spanking. And he added with a smile that as long as it doesn't contradict the law, everything is fine. Melissa asked what he thought about donating all the proceeds to Hero's country to gain their favor. Steve took Melissa's hint and agreed immediately. The girl smiled and said that she would tell Max everything herself. She said that there is one more thing. An official order received from the government. Melissa handed over the document and said that once a year, all guilds of the 6th level and above gather together. Steve was looking at the documents, and the girl said that she planned to invite him there. Our hero was surprised and said that his guild was not yet the 6th level. In response, Melissa handed him a figurine with the number 6 on it and told him that their guild had officially been promoted. The girl also added that this certificate was issued by the Bureau, and the entire job district will be handed over to them, along with autonomous rights to the territory. Steve was surprised by this news and asked how this could be. The girl said that after the infrastructure is created and people begin to settle, this area will be transferred to Steve's guild as the 13th district. Steve jokingly asked if Melissa meant it was time for him to act. Returning to the office, our hero told the guys about this news, but all 4 of them were against this idea, believing that the government did not protect them and abandoned the Earth, and now they are forcing them to protect it. Steve said that everything has already been decided and the government is interested in building the city. Chad asked in surprise if Steve had taken the bait, adding that they could use them. Steve replied that they could be in the status of a demilitarized zone and calmly expand their farm. Donnie replied that this was disappointing and suggested that they just take the money and emigrate to the United States. Steve said that he would leave this area as their headquarters and in the future plans to divide the new area into sectors. Donnie asked in surprise if Steve was planning on having them lead them. Jim said that it turns out that the one who will manage the sector will be the mayor, and if Steve appoints sector leaders and not mayors, then he will be something like a lord. Donnie really liked the phrase about the castle manager, and enthusiastically repeated the title of the position, and Munch read the news that thanks to Steve's lands, their country would become the world grain center. The guys wondered if they could match the agricultural industry of Aruka, which has trade gates all over the world, but the products are very expensive. Donnie said that if this happens, Steve will become a lord with a territory earning astronomical sums. The boy asked if our hero had signed the contract. He must keep 2 copies so that they could not say anything against it. Steve responded by saying that they couldn't even defend their own house, which of them were the managers of the castle, and if they had finished eating, then it was time for training. Suddenly Donnie doubled over and started screaming that his stomach hurt and he needed to buy medicine urgently. From this scene, Steve began to slowly lose his temper. Suddenly, this conversation was interrupted by Jim, who read the news that Hero had left the dungeon. The guys immediately started making jokes, saying, "Welcome to hell, Hero," and that it's all over with him. The news said that Hero's team had reduced the time to clear the 7th level dungeon to 8 days. Another article published Hero's response to Steve's ridicule. "I'll teach you manners." The news also showed news about the upcoming fight between Steve and Hero. In one of the interviews, the former world champion said that going one-on-one is not emptying dungeons. The SPFC commentator said that Steve has absolutely no experience fighting against an Awakened one-on-one. Another article said that 240 million was the top bid for Steve. The guys read the news in shock, surprised by the amount, and Munch said that they would not have received that amount even if they completed the dungeon 100 times. Suddenly, Chad asked Donnie to move the article down a little, noticing something. Another article stated that Steve donated the entire amount to Hero's country. Donnie screamed in shock. What was wrong with him? Why give his hard-earned money to another country? Chad suggested that this was to prevent war, to which the boy said that the angry comments did not disappear because of this, and Munch added that there is also a payment to the winner. Donnie remembered that the amount paid to the winner is double, and Jim asked if this was even real. Suddenly, Steve appeared from behind and coldly asked what they were doing here. The guys attacked Steve with questions about why he would give all the money if his life is at stake. Stewie said that if they finished eating, then let them follow him. He is going to see Job's lands. The head of the bureau told the president that, of course, the amount had been adjusted. If they distributed 5 billion each, then that would be enough. Just in case, they entered into an agreement under which Steve would donate the winnings to national funds. This would stop rumors of war. The head of the bureau, with a sly grin, told the president that this is just the beginning, and as soon as Steve achieved success in agriculture, and mysteriously fell silent, Steve was already flying to his new lands on his wyvern to see how things were going. He remembered Melissa's words that there used to be a headquarters building here. If they renovated it, it would fit about 100 people. Our hero saw some buildings on the ground and realized that the girl was talking about him. Melissa and the workers were already waiting for Steve, and noticed that the wyvern was descending. He almost sank to the ground and a strong wind rose from the flapping of his wings. One of the workers asked if the wyvern had gotten bigger, and another said that he was simply shocked when he saw them in person. Steve got down from the wyvern and it immediately went into the open portal. Melissa greeted Steve and asked him how the view was from the top, to which the guy replied that it looked good. Our hero said that it would be nice if he planted everything with trees within a radius of 4 kilometers, to which the girl replied that as soon as the territory was marked, she would send the papers for approval. Steve spread his arms, activating the skill, and fireflies began to gather around him. The next moment, a glow began to emanate from the guy, and the fireflies became hundreds of times more numerous. One of the workers asked if it was famous, and Melissa continued that it was a territory mark. The guy with the mohawk greeted all the martial arts fans, saying that Sidekick was on the air with them. He said that the fight of the century was only 15 days away. Champion Hero versus Rookie Steve, adding that their channel had prepared interviews with both of them. This morning, with all their efforts, they managed to meet Hiro's team in front of the 7th level dungeon. The boy asked how Hiro prepared for the fight, and he replied that he did not have time to train. Hiro added that soon the number of level 7 dungeons will increase sharply and humanity has no time to rest. But the news headline put things differently and now said that Hiro didn't see the need to prepare for a fight with someone like Steve. Our hero's team was eating, and Chad began to complain that he didn't remember the last time he ate warm food. Munch replied that it was last Monday, and Jim asked him to stop complaining. At that moment, Sidekick approached them and asked if they were from Team Steve, who were called a laughingstock. The guy asked if they knew about his channel and if he could interview Steve. Donnie suggested that he go to Job. He was most likely there planting trees. Soon, an article appeared saying that Steve had disappeared and was planting trees, and evil commentators began writing that he was planting them so that he would be buried under them after the fight with Hiro. Meanwhile, Anna was sitting in the office at her laptop, looking intently at the monitor and at the access denied sign. The girl tried another combination and waited tensely for the result. Suddenly, in the window with the personal information of the awakened bureau about Steve, the inscription "Accepted" appeared. The girl happily thought that she had succeeded, looking at the folders marked "Confidential." Anna opened one of the folders and began to carefully study the information received. Suddenly, undisguised surprise appeared on her face, and she thought in disbelief. 1,000 years. In an article about world betting, 85% of experts expect Hiro to win. Another article states that Hiro, aka the hope of humanity, has reduced the time to complete the dungeon to 8. In another article they wrote that the DGB transported materials for construction to Job, and at the entrance to Steve's land there is a sign warning about wolves. Another article stated that there were 6 days left until the match and the stadium was already sold out. The new article stated that the match was 2 days away and Steve was still on his turf. Hiro and Anna were sitting on the sofa in the best hotel in the city and drinking wine. The girl asked what Hiro was thinking about after taking a sip of wine. The guy replied that he was thinking about how he would kill Steve if he didn't come to the match. Placing the glass on the table, the girl said that she didn't think it would be easy. Hiro asked what she was talking about, and the girl explained that she was talking about killing Steve. She said that she checked the secret information of the Bureau of the Awakened, and it said that Steve had returned after spending 1,000 years on another planet. Hiro was surprised by this information and asked if he had regressed several times during this time. Anna replied that she didn't think he was using the regression stone like Hiro, but that he replied that it would be impossible to live 1,000 years then. She said that according to the records, Steve spent 10 years on the planet where time moves twice as fast, and since Hiro spent 500 years on Earth regressing, it doesn't sound so crazy. She added that this also explained why he hadn't met Steve in 500 years, and Hiro asked if he had found the Fountain of Eternal Youth. Anna said that there is one rare item called the Red Divine Peach. Hiro repeated the name of the Red Peach sadly, waiting for him to continue. She said that this rare object is found only once in 1,000 years on one planet, and after 10 days it disappears. God's fruit bestows immortality and eternal youth. Hiro said that the guy is becoming more and more interesting to him, because he lived 1,000 years without the regression stone. The girl said she was worried that Steve had lived longer than he had. Hiro stood up and said that no matter who his opponent was, he wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. News headlines were full of information that Steve did not arrive in the country on the day of the match. Meanwhile, Steve was working on trees on his new territory. Apples began to appear on the trees. Steve looked at the result, and Donnie stood nearby. Our hero said that this should be enough for the apple trees. Donnie said that there really is no time. But Steve didn't listen and said that pears were next in line. And the guy shouted that there were only 3 hours left, and he really had to go. Our hero said that since his level is low, he cannot plant many seedlings. And while he is away, the guys need to buy everything that Steve said. Donnie said he shouldn't worry about it and asked him to hurry up. The next moment, a portal opened behind Steve, and his uniform appeared on the guy. A huge wyvern came out of the portal, scaring Donnie so much that he fell. Steve said that he would be back soon, and the guys needed to go to several dungeons, and added that there would be no mercy if they got lazy. Donnie rubbed his head and asked what Steve meant by lazy, but our hero did not answer anything, and the vivera lifted him up. The wyvern carried the guy further and further, standing out brightly against the background of the sunset sky. Looking at him, Donnie was surprised that Steve was not at all worried before the battle with the champion, not believing that he was planting trees. When Steve was out of sight, Donnie pressed the button on the remote, and several drones flew towards him. He smiled contentedly and said that it didn't matter because he knew what he would use for the screensaver. And the stadium was already noisy and the voices of the commentators carried far away. The man said that there were 3 hours left before the fight. The audience was already filled with excitement. He said that he heard that Steve still had not arrived and asked why he decided to abandon the match. The second man said that this fight would not be easy for a newcomer who would fight the champion, and that the government of his country was responsible for Steve's actions. Hiro and Anna also arrived at the stadium and sat in the waiting room with a huge wall-to-wall window. The guy asked if there was news, and the girl replied that not long ago, he expanded his holdings in Job. Suddenly Hiro smiled when he heard the name of our hero's new lands. He thought that, as expected, Steve knew what would happen in the future. After all, the first place to open the 7th level dungeon in Steve's country is Job. When the dungeon opened, the fighting squad rushed all their forces there and was destroyed. The country lost more than half of the awakened C ranks and was unable to stop the monsters. And due to the explosions, Job was burned to the ground. After this, the continent was overrun by escaped monsters, and then, unable to stop the monsters, Steve's country fell. Hiro thought that the government wanted to stop the tragedy with Steve's help and wished them luck, calling the guy arrogant. The commentator said that there were 7 minutes left, and according to the rules, the participant would be disqualified if he did not show up an hour before the fight. Suddenly the spectators felt the wind rise and looked up. They began to whisper, asking what that sound was. Was it a monster? Suddenly a wing appeared above the stadium and everyone started shouting that it was a wyvern. Anna rose from her seat looking at the crowd, which began to shout that he was here. The commentator said that contrary to expectations, Steve arrived at the stadium on his wyvern. David jumped up, shouting what he was saying that Steve would definitely come. And the 2 men said that he had created a real drama. The head of the bureau shouted contentedly that the world would belong to Steve if he won. Melissa was also watching the broadcast, listening to the commentator say that he could not imagine Steve showing up 5 minutes before the fight. The soldiers at the field headquarters were also cheering for Steve and shouting for him to defeat them all. The commentator said that the Dragon Knight landed after that as he circled over the stadium. Jean stood behind the soldiers, and when she heard his name, she quietly said, "Bastard." Steve jumped off the wyvern, which had grown significantly larger. Our hero didn't even say anything when the wyvern growled and went into the portal, disappearing from the stadium. The audience watched this enthusiastically and admired the magic of the call. Steve looked around and asked why there were so many people here and where was Hiro. Our hero shouted to the entire stadium for Hiro to come out. The commentator said that apparently Steve is looking for Hiro in the arena, watching as he calls out to his opponent. The crowd also took up Steve's cry and everyone started calling out for Hiro in unison. Hearing the screams, Hiro stood up and told Anna that he was leaving. The girl instantly rose from the sofa and stopped him, taking his hand. Hiro smiled and told her not to worry, he would win and come back. Suddenly white flakes began to fall on Steve from above and a bird flew over his head. Steve raised his head up as the commentator started shouting that Hiro had arrived. The long-haired guy fell from above, and the floor of the stadium could not stand the jump. The crowd immediately roared with joy, celebrating the appearance of the champion. But Steve wasn't surprised or scared, and calmly asked if he was Hiro. But he did not answer, but said that he wanted to ask our hero a few questions before he killed him. Hiro asked the guy if he was an apocalypse survivor. But Steve didn't know what he was talking about and asked what kind of apocalypse he was talking about. But Hiro didn't believe him and said that his acting was bad. Our hero gradually began to get irritated and asked what kind of bullshit he was talking about. Hiro asked if there was still a regression stone and how many years it could regress. But Steve again didn't understand what they were talking about and asked what kind of stone it was. The commentator said that apparently they were talking and asked the second one if he was interested in what they were talking about. The second commenter said that perhaps Hiro is giving him advice as a more experienced fighter. The first commentator said that then they should listen and sent a broadcast drone to the guys. 3 drones began to rapidly descend down into the arena in which the guys stood. Hiro began to activate the skill and asked if Steve felt like the world was at his feet after he returned from the past. Our hero asked in surprise how he could have arrived in the past. 2 blades appeared in Hiro's hands and he said that Steve was asking for it. The guy swung his blades in a jump and said that he had a way to get our hero to talk. The commentator shouted excitedly as Hiro began to attack. Suddenly everyone watching froze in surprise, not believing what they were seeing in front of them. They saw Steve's fist connect with Hiro's cheek, who was surprised by what happened. From the force of our hero's blow, the guy flew back into the deathly silence of the huge stadium. Hiro landed on the ground and his fall left a hole in the floor, and Steve began to approach him. The commentator started shouting that Hiro had fallen. He seemed to have received serious injuries and was not moving. Steve slowly approached him, and the commentator shouted that Hiro was in danger. Our hero flexed his fist and said that apparently he was just a crazy bastard. He shouted for the guy to get up and asked if he was really dead. And at these words, Hiro moved his hand. Steve asked how the champion could be so weak. He ordered Hiro to get up because he had not yet received what he deserved. At these words, the guy opened his eyes and began to slowly get up. The commentator started shouting that Hiro stood up watching the guy barely get up. The audience cheered for Hiro and encouraged him, asking him to get up and fight. The guy looked at the blood from his nose and could not understand whether he was struck by magic. Steve said that everything should take its course and that first of all he needed to learn humility. These words made Hiro angry and rushing into battle told Steve to shut up. But this attack was stopped by another punch to the face. Hero looked at Steve in shock and thought he couldn't see his fist. Steve struck the next blow to the guy's stomach and he flew back again. Our hero decided not to delay and activated the tornado skill. At that same second, Hero began to pick up a stream of wind along with fireflies. And when the skill was fully activated, Hero was thrown into the air in a huge air-water flow. Steve jumped up above the fallen hero, and a ball of flame appeared in his hand. Our hero activated another skill, Fire Fairy, Stream. Steve lowered his hand with a fireball onto Hero, and the flames enveloped the area around him. The spectators in the arena clutched their heads in shock and covered their mouths, not believing what was happening. Everything around was on fire, and the explosion that Steve brought down on Hero was understood by a column of smoke. The comment screamed that Hero was getting a one-sided beating, but quickly corrected himself and said that he was getting hit. He turned to the second commenter and asked what he thought about the situation, but the man said nothing, looking in horror at the arena ahead. The spectators screamed at what was happening in the arena, and some even shed tears. Everyone was shocked as Steve lifted Hero's unconscious body above him by the throat. The commentator shouted in shock that it seemed like Hero had died, but Steve told him not to pretend because he knows that the guy is not dead. Our hero said this for a reason. He saw Hero's health bar. Steve said he wanted to ask something and asked why he was looking for our hero. Hero replied that it was because he wanted to kill Steve and his health was slowly increasing. Our hero did not understand this answer and he asked why. Hero's eyes turned red and his health increased as he said that Steve deserved to die. Our hero asked in shock why he deserved to die. Hero's face began to change and he said that because of him, a plan 500 years in the making was ruined. Steve asked in surprise what this plan was that he had been working on for so long. Hero turned into a monster, and his health was almost restored, and he said to himself, "Monster breakthrough." Steve thought in surprise that this was a transformation, and Hero shouted that he had to save the Earth. Everything around began to become covered with a red glow, and Steve once again said that the guy was crazy. Hero's transformation was completed, and he activated the skill God's Fury. The space around the guy seemed to explode, and Steve flew back. From the force of energy emanating from Hero, the glass in the stadium crumbled into small fragments and began to fall on the spectators. Red lightning began to strike in different directions, breaking the walls and ceiling. The minister and deputy chief watched what was happening at headquarters. The minister said that this potion that restored him was taken out, and the deputy began to worry about an explosion. And at this time it was no longer Hero who was walking through the stadium, but a huge horned monster. Looking at him, the minister said that judging by the transformation, Hero learned some interesting things on the planet Kuchan. After the explosion, smoke billowed over the stadium and the groans of survivors were heard. Someone screamed, someone cried. A little boy called for his mother who was lying nearby, covered with stones. Many people sitting in the stadium died after the explosion. Even Anna, sitting in the waiting room, was damaged, and the wall-sized window there was smashed to pieces. Hero stood in the arena, transformed into a huge monster with a long tail. He growled that this was the finishing blow. God's wrath. The skill was so powerful that the human body could not handle it, so he had to summon a monster. And he was surprised that this skill had to be used on an ordinary person, because Hero was saving it for the boss of the 8th level. Suddenly the monster heard some noise ahead, and his eyes widened in surprise. Steve appeared from under the collapse. He held his head and complained that it hurt. Hero looked in shock at our hero, who calmly walked towards him, shrouded in green light. Looking at the monster, Steve said that this bastard is amazing, and Hero couldn't believe that he was able to survive the final blow. God's wrath. Coming closer, Steve called the monster a bastard because he can also transform. Hero responded by asking what item he used to be so strong. What did he use to regress? Steve replied that he did not know what he meant by the word regress, and it was not an item, but the blessing of the forest skill. Hero shouted in disbelief that how could there be a skill that is stronger than the elixir? Steve answered with a smile that this is an elixir-level skill. It completely restores the consumed vitality and mana in 5 seconds. Hero finally lost his temper and shouted, "Is our hero really smiling?" But Steve didn't understand the question and chuckled questioningly. Preparing to kick, Hero asked if the guy thought this was all fun. At this time, Steve was looking at the information window, where it was said that in front of him was the monster Hero, a level U hybrid. At that moment, the monster struck, which made our hero surprised. "When it turns out that the world died because of you," Hero said, hitting Steve with his tail. "Can you laugh?" the monster asked, raising his fist. He repeated his question again, throwing a punch at Steve, who was able to block it. Hero screamed for our hero to die, landing one blow after another. But the blows seemed to miss, and Steve said that the U rank was not that strong. And at that very second, he struck the monster with a powerful kick to the jaw. Steve asked if his 500-year plan was destroyed because of him, and now the planet will be destroyed. Therefore, Steve continued, the destruction of the planet is also his fault, and therefore he must die at the hands of Hero. right? Steve asked, extending his hand forward, releasing a green glow forward. Shielding himself from the flow of wind with his hands, Hiro said that since he understood everything, then let him just die. Suddenly, a mysterious purple stone appeared in the monster's hand, which he clutched tightly in his hand. A purple glow appeared around the monster, and he screamed that Steve had ruined everything. He asked if he knew how Hiro reached this level. How dare someone like him talk like that? The monster suddenly remembered how he had watched a movie about superheroes a long time ago. A full hall of kids rejoiced when the main character dealt the decisive blow and won. Hiro, then just a baby, was glad that his hero did it and saved the whole world. Suddenly, the kids gasped as the hero fell to his knees, blood flowing from under his maxi. The hero said that everything was burned to the ground, and it was time to fix it. The kids started screaming, and the hero said that he will be forgotten. But everything is fine as long as his friends and loved ones can continue to live. The children cried, and the voiceover explained that the hero's soul stone turns back time. And only Hiro did not cry. He smiled, looking at the final scene, unlike the other crying children. He thought he was okay, even if he was forgotten forever, because this world only needs to remember one hero. Suddenly, Steve's foot hit Hiro in the face so hard that his eyes widened in surprise. From such a blow, the monster flew to the side, and Steve once again repeated that he was just a crazy bastard. Hiro fell on his stomach and grabbed the ground with his claws, trying not to fly further. He started coughing up blood and slowly sat up, looking at Steve. Hiro thought that he was really strong. He did not believe that there was a person whom he could not defeat in this form, and wondered who he was. He realized that there was no sign of Steve's regression, and decided that it didn't matter anymore. He could start over. At this point, Steve struck again, asking what he was muttering. Our hero said that he was not the reason for the destruction of his plan, and from now on he will teach him wisdom. Hiro didn't resist much and mentally asked Steve to continue chatting and tell him everything. That purple stone held in Hiro's hand was called a copy stone, and had already copied 79%. The monster thought that in the next regression Steve's power would be completely under his control. This stone not only copied strength but also absorbed the soul. Hiro pointed out that only he should be the hero who will save this world. Steve activated the reality skill. His hand glowed blue, and black veins appeared on his face. The next moment it was not a man's hand that stabbed into Hiro's face, but a beast's paw. The huge bear that Steve had turned into struck with such force that Hiro flew backwards. Hiro's nose was immediately broken, and several teeth fell out of his mouth from this blow. But the force of the blow was so great that the monster flew into the wall and broke through it with its body. Already in human form, Hiro fell to the ground into a crowd of people, and they frowned contemptuously, calling him a cruel bastard. The guy's hair turned white. He lay on the ground and cursed when he realized that the copy stone was broken. Blood was flowing from one eye, and he squinted slightly, watching the eagle circle above him. It was Steve in the form of an eagle. He slowly descended towards Hiro, and he thought that he was not a person. Our hero dropped to one knee next to the guy lying on the ground. He asked Hiro with a smile if he now sees the real state of affairs. But the guy didn't understand what Steve was talking about and asked what kind of nonsense. Our hero said that the reason he couldn't save the world was because he was too weak. Hiro's eyes turned red with anger, and he hissed for Steve to shut his mouth. Our hero seriously said that he should not appear on his territory again. Otherwise he would die next time. Hiro smiled and said that 95% of the population will die soon due to the apocalypse, and he is also a corpse. Steve called the guy a raving idiot and asked why his past should become his future. Iroh's eyes widened when he heard Steve's words. There is no future for a guy who lives in the past like you. The commentator said that even though Hiro lost consciousness, Steve turned into an eagle and flew into him. Jean watched the entire fight, clenching her hands into fists, and one thought was spinning in her head. Why? That day, when she was in the hospital after the dungeon, she asked Steve why they couldn't. Our hero turned around and looked sadly at the girl, saying that she was still too weak. Our forces are not balanced. One of us will suffer losses, the guy said. And Jean was even more angry that after these words, he was walking with another. Leaving the room, Jean angrily said that this bastard was talking nonsense. And the news was full of headlines about Steve's absolute victory. The article stated that more than 48 people died in the stadium where the match was taking place. The unofficial #1 in the world, Steve, donated the entire amount of his winnings to Hiro's country. Another article stated that the victims' families were preparing a class action lawsuit against Hiro. And Hiro had a dream where he saw Steve in the guise of a clawed beast, which forbade him to appear on his territory. For a guy who lives in the past like you, there is no future. He heard the words and immediately woke up. The guy woke up in the ward and looking around wondered how long he had spent here. Hiro noticed the phone next to the bed and opened the news, the headlines of which were about Steve's victory and the lawsuit against the former champion. After the news, Hiro started reading people's comments, and an evil grin appeared on his face. Reading the accusations and death wishes, The girl said that they were all hypocritical bastards. At that moment Anna entered the room. She was safe and sound. Seeing that the guy was wearing clothes and holding the phone in his hands, the girl was confused. But she quickly came to her senses, grabbed the phone from the guy's hands and asked him not to read. She said that people are simply shocked by his defeat, and they act this way because their pride is hurt. Hiro understood that Anna was protecting him and did not answer, sighing heavily. The girl asked if he was okay, and the guy replied that he wanted to be alone. She said she would go out, but would take the phone with her because Hiro needed rest more than anything right now. The guy was left in the large room all alone and still looked at the front door for some time, after which he stood up and, going to the window, pulled back the curtain and frowned. And outside the window, many people with signs shouted for him to apologize and leave. He thought that these people always followed him, no matter how much he devotes himself to them. They do not change. Hiro opened the information window and looked sadly at the copy stone. It was written that the copying was interrupted and the guy thought it was a shame. If he had held on longer, he would have been able to copy Steve. Hiro extended his hand and a red stone appeared in it, which was the very stone of regression. And behind the stone, several nearby, mini versions of the planet began to appear, filling the entire room. With this stone, Hiro can return to the Earth of 20 years ago, and he sees no other choice but to return and get rid of Steve. He thought that he could activate the stone in 2 years, but if he could upgrade it to the 3rd level. His thoughts were interrupted by 3 men who entered the room without knocking. Hiro was familiar with them and greeted the one in the middle. The hooded man was glad that Hiro woke up and asked if he was okay. The guy replied that in a sense, yes, and asked what it was. The man said that it was an order from the Bureau, to which Hiro replied that he had not received any notification. He replied that he didn't know and that he was simply told to bring the guy. Hiro turned to the other 2 guys and asked why they were there too. But the men's answers were different. One said that they were also cold. The second said that they met along the way. Hiro silently looked at the guys, understanding why they had come. And they looked away to the side. They were clearly scared to look at the guy. All the awakened C ranks were gathered together, and this was clearly not to present them with an award, Hiro thought. The guy told them to wait outside. He needed to get ready. The hooded man said, "Of course," and they began to leave the room. The tall man said they would just be quiet because 2 more are waiting outside the door. The hooded man pulled him back, but it was too late. The 3rd man said that Hiro had already guessed everything, and it was too late to be quiet. With an evil smile, the guy asked if the 5 of them really hoped to defeat him. The hooded man tried to calm Hiro down and said that it was just an investigation and he needed to go there. The guy's smile became even angrier, and he asked who they were going to investigate. All 3 tensed up at that moment and no one could utter a word. Hiro thought that on the day of the fight, the agency must have recorded their entire conversation with Steve. Perhaps they were interested in the items in his inventory. He asked, do the guys really need the regression stone too and they want to lock it up somewhere and torture it? The hooded man said that everything was wrong. It was because of items missing from the report. The tall man suddenly called Hiro a name and said that since there is something like this, shouldn't he use it for the benefit of the townspeople? From these words, Hiro's eyes turned red, and a ball of energy appeared in his hand. He said that with these words, he had crossed the line, and their country would soon understand what it had lost because of this mistake. The man responded by also starting to activate his skills to catch Hiro. The guy's eyes became increasingly red and barely noticeable horns began to grow on his head. The 2 guys behind the door suddenly saw a light start shining from the window in the door and blood flowing down. When they were about to enter the room, something exploded inside and they flew back, along with the door. The men looked in surprise at the hole instead of the door. And when the smoke cleared and they saw what was going on inside, Hiro, in the form of a monster, pierced the tall guy with his tail and held the second one by the head, lifting him above the ground. He asked if he looked weak for losing once and added that the guy's neck would be broken if anyone moved. The hooded guy stuck his hand out and called Hiro Captain, trying to stop him. The monster said that he shouldn't call him that and asked who gave the order. The hooded man answered immediately that it was the commissioner's order. Tucker is a commissioner of the Bureau of the Supernatural, a patriot who looks only at bloodline. He waited for Hiro to fail and bared his teeth as soon as the opportunity arose. The hooded man said the commissioner was unsure of his loyalty to the country. Tucker said that when Hiro's team completed the 7th level dungeon, 9 people died. Did Hiro transform at that moment to heal them? And the items and skills were not marked anywhere. That means all the reports the group provided were lies, Tucker said, adding that he wanted to know if he had any other items hidden. The hooded man relayed the commissioner's words that before they open the investigative committee, they must ask Hiro a few questions. The guy said that everything is wrong. The commissioner just wants to take all the items for himself. The monster assumed that the commissioner had offered him the position of captain of the first battle team if things went well. The hooded man didn't know how to respond to Hiro's suggestion. He remembered the commissioner's words that his loyalty was unquestionable, and that they needed people like him. The monster, realizing that he was right, said with a smile that they were stupid people. He has already seen the destruction of this country 25 times. He wants to restore civilization in this particular country, but the plan has failed because there is no way to overcome greed. Hiro said that he wanted to ask one question. Does Anna know about everything? The guy in the hood closed his eyes. He clearly didn't want to answer this question, but the monster shouted at him to speak immediately. The man gave up and stuttering said that she was aware of what was happening. Hiro lost his temper with frustration and screamed, squeezing the hand that held the man's head. Blood sprayed everywhere as Hiro thanked the hooded man for all his hard work. He realized where this was going and tried to stop Hiro, shouting out his title. But it was already too late, and a huge explosion occurred in the room. The breaking news said that Hiro had escaped, killing 3 C-rank Awakens and injuring 2. And at this time, the guy's action was discussed in the Supernatural Bureau. Looking out the window, the commissioner angrily said that Hiro was an ungrateful bastard. He said that this is why you shouldn't help strangers. They will stab you in the back because they accepted the guy, helped him. And he still dares to show his teeth. Tucker came to the conclusion that Hiro was originally a spy for his country, planted by him on purpose. The commissioner decided that this was more than enough to persuade the prime minister. He thought that with this incident, they could get rid of many problems and create flawless heroes to replace Hiro. The man turned to the door and loudly called for his assistant. A guy immediately came through the door and asked what he needed to do. Tucker ordered all broadcast stations to be contacted and they would have a press conference about Hiro in 2 hours. The news kept a close eye on Hiro, with one of the headlines saying that the strongest man was now in Job. In another article, Jim was training the guys, and the headline said that there were a lot of new recruits in the guild. Another newspaper said that the countdown to Job becoming the 13th district had already begun. And on one of the YouTube channels, a video was released with the title, Analysis of Steve's Guild, Jobs version. In other news, a real estate expert said this was an expected expansion. In another video, they analyzed Steve's fight, calling it, The Dragon Knight Strives for Divine Powers. Donnie studied all this news and never ceased to be amazed at the abundance of information. All the top 10 videos on YouTube were about Steve, and the guy said with a smile that this was world-class. Suddenly, he came across an article about how Hiro had escaped from the hospital. The news anchor said Tucker called a press conference and offered to listen to what was going on. The commissioner said that there is reason to suspect that Hiro is a spy, and they demand an explanation for Steve's terrorist attack. In response to these accusations, the press secretary replied that the accusation was unfounded, and the country was outraged by such a provocation. Donnie listened intently to the minister's speech, sighing heavily. And when he saw the news that Hiro had disappeared, he immediately became nervous. He thought it was impossible for a guy beaten half to death to come here. Donnie wondered what if he came here again when Steve wasn't at the guild. Immediately from this thought, a shiver passed through the guy's body and cold sweat appeared. Donnie stormed out of his office and rushed to find Steve. He rushed into the forest, complaining that Steve always disappeared during serious incidents, and asked why he couldn't stay at home. Suddenly, blue lightning began to appear in the sky and the guy stopped in surprise. He looked fearfully at the sky and thought that it looked somehow familiar. Suddenly, a giant lightning struck the ground and people's screams were heard from there. A crowd of workers ran out of the forest towards Donnie, shouting. Running closer to the guy, the workers began shouting at him to run too. The boy thought it was impossible that this crazy bastard was already here. Frightenedly repeating the words about a madman, Donnie rushed along with the workers and quickly overtook them. Suddenly, Jim ran to meet him and they stared at each other in surprise. The guy stopped and Jim asked Donnie where he was running. The boy immediately expressed his assumption that Crazy Hiro was already here. But Jim asked what he was talking about because he had received a report that a portal had opened nearby and he was running there. Donnie stupidly repeated the word portal, as did the workers running past, and Jim confirmed this. They both turned back, watching as the lightning continued to strike the ground. Suddenly, a red ball began to appear from the lightning. The guys looked at what was happening in shock, and Donnie said that this portal looked scary. A military man came to them with equipment, and they found out that this was a portal of the 7th level, which would explode in 42 days. Gene shouted that there was too little time, and Chad remembered that the same portal had 23 gates and 120 days. The guys clutched their heads, thinking it was too much. Chad thought that they were so focused on building the 13th district that they took people without looking at their abilities, and if there was a breakthrough, they would not be able to guarantee survival. Only Munch was calm and said that they should take it and clear it before a breakthrough occurs. The guys lowered their heads, not knowing how to respond to such a proposal. Munch asked if Steve would allow this. Jim said that first they need to return alive, and Donnie asked if they were really going there. The kid said he was still a pathetic E-rank, and Jim said he was too. Jim asked where Steve was at the right time. Donnie said he would look for him. Chad said he would look around the animal farm and walked forward. Munch said that he would check in the east, and Jim decided to go to the entrance. The guys went in opposite directions and no one noticed that in the middle there was a ferret that looked like Steve. And as if sensing the ferret's gaze, the guys slowly turned back. And the ferret of Steve's voices asked why they decided to accept this territory. Chad said it was because they were blinded by their appointment to the 13th district. Donnie also added that he was blinded by the appointment to the position of manager, and the guys supported these words. But Steve said no, it was because it was a big hunting ground. The boys gasped in unison when they heard these words and realized them. Ferret said it was obvious why they chose this location, and he really liked the way they thought. Steve invited the guys to feel the wildness of this nature. The guys listened to the sounds of nature. Munch even closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Steve said that right now such a big jackpot was right in their path. The ferret asked if they shouldn't hunt here with grateful hearts. Donnie said they were grateful, but their levels are right now. Steve said that the prey stretches out its neck and asks to be caught, but they want to run away. He added that if they want to live like this, they will run until they return to their previous life. Words about his former life cut Munch's soul painfully and his eyes widened, and Steve asked again if they wanted to go back to their past life. The guys unanimously began to say that they did not want to return and worked hard to be here. Donnie rolled up his sleeves, ready to go into the dungeon right now, and Munch was ready to be the scout. Suddenly, the ferret lit up with a blue light and the guys froze looking at it. Soon, in place of the ferret, the outlines of a human body began to appear. Steve smiled and said that since this was their first level 7 dungeon, they might need some time. The guys immediately switched gears and started saying that they needed time to prepare and stock up on hot food. Our hero said that someone should train the newcomers and supervise the construction, so Jim and Munch will go on the first raid. The guys enthusiastically said that they understood everything and went to get ready. Donnie said that he was upset because his name would not be included in the very first raid in the 7th level dungeon of their country. Hearing the complaints, Steve said that he was coming too, which the boy was clearly not happy about. Our hero stepped towards the dungeon and said that they were entering now, and Donnie tried to stop him. He asked Steve to wait, but the guy was deaf to his pleas and entered the portal. Steve boldly walked inside the portal and called the other guys to follow him. The guys cheered on the guys as they went into the portal, with Donnie running last. Chad excitedly asked if it was okay to just enter a level 7 dungeon like that with Munch standing behind him. Steve and Jim had already entered the portal and their bodies were shrouded in a pinkish glow, with Donnie running behind and asking him to wait. On the other side of the portal, the outlines of the guys began to appear. Steve came out first, assessing the situation, followed by Jim and Donnie, narrowing their eyes. Immediately a skeleton monster jumped out at the guys and extended a bone hand towards them. Donnie was so frightened by this attack that he forgot all the words and shouted something incomprehensible. An inscription appeared in the information window that the guys had ended up in the lands of the undead. The guys on the other side of the portal received the same data and everyone froze in fear. The news presenter said that the first level 7 dungeon had appeared in Steve's country, and there were already 8 of them in the world. The world's major media outlets say this is to be expected, and the international airport is overwhelmed as people flee the country. The presenter offered to see what it looked like on the spot, and the live broadcast turned on, and there the presenter was attacked by a man shouting that there were no tickets, and a woman in a panic asked to open the sea route. The confused presenter said that unrest was beginning in the country. The Bureau was consulting what to do next, and Steve's guild team had already entered the dungeon. The awakened Bureau was discussing that the broadcast stations had done a brilliant job, as if they had wiretapped the Bureau's offices. The head of the Bureau asked if Steve's team was right to enter the dungeon immediately after his appearance. The guy replied that Steve, Donnie, and Jim were currently in the dungeon. One man sadly listed the ranks of the guys, and the second asked why Steve took the guys with him. The man sitting next to him reminded him that Donnie had a video memory skill. The head said that they would at least leave videos for other teams. However, there are already tons of videos on the internet of clearing level 7 dungeons. The man folded his arms across his chest and asked how the battle group's preparations were going. The man replied that 13 teams were already waiting for orders, but there were only a few awakened A ranks there, mostly B rank. Another man said it was like sending them to certain death. They would be lucky if they didn't run away straight away. Besides, too little time, because they must clear the dungeon 88 times in 44 days. The man with glasses said that Heroes team's record is 8 days, and since time goes twice as fast there, the cleanup takes about 20 days. The head of the Bureau considered that therefore they would need to clear the dungeon twice a day. One of the men said that it doesn't matter how outstanding Steve's skills are, and the second added that maybe they need to escape the country. One of those gathered asked whether it might be worth turning to other guilds for help, but he was told that everyone was now busy clearing out the 6th level dungeons, which had become very numerous. The head of the Bureau closed his eyes and said that, as they say, out of the frying pan and into the fire. The man with glasses asked what the chief thought about evacuating the people from Job and placing them near the defensive wall for the duration of the threat of a breakthrough. The head replied that everyone would die if a second dungeon appeared in the city. He asked that Steve's barrier trees weren't good protection. Even if they were able to catch all the monsters in the barrier trees, if another dungeon appeared, the guilds would be powerless. The leader thought that if they dealt with the dungeon on Steve's lands, it would become the safest place in the world. He asked if Melissa was now on Steve's lands, and asked to call her and find out how things were going on there. A drone flew over Steve's lands. Approaching the construction site of a large building, the Bureau saw the picture and someone said it was quieter than expected. They were surprised that construction was still going on. Someone asked if this was not the Department of State Security. The drone flew on, and those gathered were surprised that a child was riding a wolf, and the workers were having lunch peacefully. An elephant, ridden by monkeys, ran behind a pack of wolves led by Bill, and the men were amazed that they had started a war. The man, shocked, asked if the others had seen the monkey throwing stones from the back of the elephant. Looking at the calm and peaceful landscape, they asked if this was definitely their country. The men agreed that it looked like another world, and even decided to check the location of the drone. The head chuckled and asked where the department head Melissa was. The drone flew further, and ended up above a long residential building. The screen showed a girl sunbathing on a sun lounger, and someone said that this was a soldier's dormitory building. Suddenly someone asked if it was not Melissa who was sunbathing, and when the drone flew closer, they were finally convinced of this. It really was her. The girl was lying in an open black swimsuit, and her eyes were protected by dark glasses. The eyes of the men in the office widened when they realized that it was really Melissa on the screen. The bespectacled man said that her appearance illustrated the situation on the ground well. At this time, Melissa seemed to feel someone's gaze and lowered her glasses, looking ahead. Immediately, an energy ball appeared in her hand, and the girl shouted angrily, "What kind of bastard wanted to die?" Suddenly, she noticed that on the drone was the abbreviation of their awoken bureau. The whole essence of the situation dawned on the girl, and she immediately covered herself with her hand, quietly groaning in embarrassment. The head of the bureau covered his face with his hand and quietly asked if she had really picked up the impudence from her friend Jean. Quickly putting on a shirt, the girl made an excuse that it was lunchtime, but realizing that words were unnecessary, she simply apologized. The head asked how things were going on site and asked the girl to give a short briefing. Covering herself with her shirt, the girl said that she was sorry, but she was still on the screen. Immediately, someone shouted to the one who was controlling the drone that it needed to be turned, not down, but to the side. Melissa said that when the 7th-level dungeon appeared, there was a little commotion due to the evacuation guidelines. But after Steve went to clear it, everything became calm. 3 hours after their appearance, construction continued as planned, with Deputy Chief Chad keeping an eye on everything and Munch training the newcomers. After getting dressed, the girl appeared on the screen again and asked if there were any more questions. Someone said that Job was not like their country, and the girl replied that everyone trusted Steve. The man reported that the Ministry of Defense sent the 707th Detachment, led by Valentine, to Job. The head said that they still had to do everything possible to prevent a breakthrough from happening, and asked if they had no hope for Steve. Suddenly, the man asked the manager to bring his combat equipment, surprising everyone present. The head responded mysteriously by saying that he would now be the commander of the expedition to the 7th-level dungeon. Silence reigned in the hall, and all those present only silently looked at the head of the Bureau of the Awakened. And somewhere in another country, Anna was sitting handcuffed to a chair. The door to the room where she was slowly opened, and light entered with it. The girl slowly opened her eyes, trying to understand where she was and what happened. Commissioner Tucker stood in front of her. He asked if she was really awake. The girl looked at him angrily and said that he was making a mistake. He said that the girl was still quite energetic and asked if she needed to be shocked again. From these words, the girl's ardor actually diminished a little. After making sure that she was no longer sarcastic, Tucker placed the iron bracelet in front of her. When she saw it, the girl excitedly asked where he got it from. The commissioner asked why she was so surprised, because this was not an item that she often carried, and she hid it quite well. Anna's eyes widened in shock when she heard those words. The man said that she didn't need to think too much because they had already looked at what was inside. The girl asked what he wanted, and the man said that it contained some pretty interesting notes. She said that it was just a diary, to which the man asked that probably even Hero was not aware of its existence. Anna looked angrily at the commissioner, but did not find what to answer him. The man called her insidious, adding that she specialized in gathering information, and Hero probably trusted her because he did not know that she was capable of intercession. The girl did not want to listen to this and asked the man to get to the point. Tucker said that this diary contained information about the future, information about who would become a hero, when and where incidents happened, and even the date of the end of the world. Anna continued to remain silent and glared angrily at the man. He continued that, knowing the future, Hero gathered people with great potential and made it seem like he had trained them. He took into the team those who could become great without his help. Then he became a champion, an idol of the country, and citizens who knew nothing recognized him as their hero. All this is possible because of the Stone of Regression. The girl smiled and asked if he really wanted to know this. In response, Tucker asked Anna to tell her where Hiro was now, and in return she would get whatever she wanted. The commissioner repeated his question, telling Anna that he would grant her everything if she told him where Hiro was hiding. Without a moment's hesitation,